Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back, to a time before words, before kingdoms, before even the idea of getting high existed. You're crouched beside a flickering fire, the air thick with smoke, your skin sticky with the sweat of survival. Somewhere in the darkness, something green crackles in the flames, releasing a scent that's oddly sweet, earthy and new. You inhale, curious, cautious, and for a moment, the world slows. Shapes dance brighter, sounds shimmer closer, and the stars above look like they're pulsing just for you. You don't know it, but you've just taken part in the first accidental encounter with cannabis smoke in human history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my night owls are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle closer to the embers, watching the flames curl around bits of dried grass and seeds. The scent drifts, sharp, resinous, faintly floral. It's the smell of cannabis sativa, though you don't have a name for it yet. Early humans, tens of thousands of years ago, didn't cultivate it for pleasure or medicine. They just found it growing wild on riverbanks and plains across Central Asia. It was one of those hardy plants that followed humanity's footsteps, growing wherever we left disturbed soil. You can imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers huddled against the cold. Someone tosses a handful of unknown stalks into the fire for kindling. The smoke changes, thicker, sweeter, and within minutes, the night feels a little different. The stories flow more freely, laughter comes easier, and even the shadows seem less threatening. It's possible that the first use of cannabis wasn't a deliberate act at all, but a happy accident, smoke drifting over the camp, wrapping around tired wanderers in invisible calm. Historians still argue whether cannabis was first encountered as a fiber plant or a psychoactive one. Some evidence suggests people in the Altai Mountains of Siberia were using its seeds for food and oil long before they discovered its other properties. But one charred seed in a fire pit can change everything. Maybe one person noticed the calming buzz and decided to toss in a few more next time. And so, without knowing, humans began a relationship that would last millennia. The ancient world was full of smoky mysteries. Imagine it: firelight, drums, flickering shadows, and someone discovering that certain plants didn't just burn. They transformed the air, and maybe even the mind. Cannabis was one among many early intoxicants. Poppies offered dreams, fermented fruit gave dizziness, but cannabis gave clarity wrapped in comfort. A strange in-between state where fear melted, but awareness sharpened. Perfect for a long night under the stars, when predators might be lurking just beyond the fire's glow. You pick up a stalk, fibrous, sticky with resin. The plant is stubborn but versatile. Its seeds crunch between your teeth like tiny nuts. Its stalks twist into cords strong enough to bind a spearhead or weave a net. And that smell, addictive in its own subtle way. Early humans probably carried seeds in their pouches, tossing them along their routes. They didn't know it yet, but they were domesticating it, one fire pit at a time. Now, here's your first mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists have found hemp fibers dating back at least 26,000 years in what is now the Czech Republic. That's not just old, it's practically prehistoric fashion. People were already spinning hemp into thread before they even invented pottery. And here's your first quirky tidbit: ancient cannabis plants likely contained much lower THC levels than modern strains. You wouldn't get the same strong high. Instead, it was more of a subtle mood lift, like taking the edge off after a long day of mammoth hunting. The smell of the smoke lingers as the group drifts to sleep, heads resting on stone and fur. It's easy to picture you among them, half asleep, mind wandering, watching sparks lift into the dark sky. This was the first spark of human curiosity toward altered consciousness, the earliest experiment with changing how we feel through nature. Maybe it wasn't about escaping reality. It was about understanding it from a different angle. Historians still argue whether these first encounters were truly psychoactive or merely symbolic. Smoke as offering, rather than experience. But given how consistently cannabis appears in ancient burial sites and fire pits, the evidence tilts toward deliberate use. Some of the earliest hotboxes might have been burial chambers filled with fragrant smoke, guiding the spirits to wherever they were believed to go next. You wake to morning mist, your head heavy but peaceful. The tribe moves on, leaving behind a circle of ash. Yet a few seeds remain in the soil, sprouting weeks later. That's how cannabis follows humans, by accident, by design, by pure adaptability. Wherever we go, it goes. Fast forward a few thousand years. You're in a grassy valley near modern-day Kazakhstan. Herds graze lazily, while a group of early nomads gathers stalks of a familiar plant. They crush its seeds, mix them with animal fat, and smear the paste onto sore muscles. It's medicine now, too. Those same hands that wove rope from hemp are discovering its soothing touch. In that sense, cannabis was never just a drug. It was food, fiber, medicine, and mystery, all rolled into one humble plant. It's the Swiss Army knife of prehistory. Even ancient dogs and horses might have brushed against its sticky flowers, spreading it farther with every step. You sit at the edge of a lake, watching reflections ripple. The air hums with life, and the memory of that smoky night feels like the first whisper of civilization itself. People started experimenting, not in labs, but in fields and fires. Every puff, every seed, every discovery was part of humanity learning to collaborate with nature's chemistry. There's a strange comfort in realizing that this moment, someone sitting beside a flame, chasing calm in chaos, is timeless. You're connected to every ancestor who did the same thing. You, them, and the smoke that ties it all together. And if you think this is where it ends, think again. Because that tiny spark of discovery doesn't fade, it spreads. Across continents, across languages, across generations. Soon, cannabis isn't just a plant, it's a symbol. A companion on the long, winding road toward meaning, comfort, and connection. The embers glow faintly as the night wind picks up. You stand, stretch, and take one last look at the fire pit. The smoke rises like a spirit, gentle, persistent, unbroken. You don't yet know that this scent will travel through centuries, through temples and tombs, through lore and legend. All you know is that for a fleeting moment, you felt a little less human, a little more connected. And that's how it all began. The first inhale, the first calm night, the first whispered bond between human and herb. The ember that still hasn't gone out. You wake to a world changing shape beneath dawn's mist. The fire from last night is nothing but grey dust now, but the smell of that strange plant lingers faintly on your skin. Somewhere nearby, the same green stalks sway in the morning light. You don't yet have words like ritual or harvest, but you've learned something powerful when you burn this plant. It makes the night gentler. That single discovery is enough to echo through generations. Over time, your descendants stop wandering so far. They begin to notice how certain seeds grow better when planted near camp. You kneel down, scraping at the dirt with a stick, pressing a few of those same seeds into the ground. The earth is soft, the air humid. Without realizing it, you've just become one of the first cannabis farmers. Thousands of years pass in a blink. The nomads become settlers, and the fireside curiosity becomes cultivation. Across Central Asia, and into what we now call China, people start growing hemp fields, so vast they ripple like water in the wind. The stalks aren't burned anymore, at least not all of them. They're twisted into ropes, spun into cloth, and pounded into paper long before Egypt ever dreams of the same. You walk through one of those early villages now. Mud houses, clay pots, smoke rising from cooking fires. The smell of hemp oil simmers in pans, rich and nutty. A young woman grinds seeds in a stone bowl, humming softly as she adds them to a paste that glistens like honey. It's food, it's medicine, and, if the rumors around the elders' tents are true, it's also something divine. The first organized rituals with cannabis begin here. Anthropologists suspect that around 4000 BCE, early cultures in Western China and Central Asia used cannabis not just for practical needs, but as a spiritual bridge. Shamans, those early healers who spoke with spirits and storms, would toss dried leaves onto embers, then breathe in the rising smoke. The idea wasn't to get high, but to open a door to hear the whispers of ancestors more clearly. The air in the tent is thick, heavy, swirling. You can barely see the outlines of the people sitting around you, but you hear them. Low chanting, rhythmic drumming. A shaman, his face painted with ash, feeds the fire another handful of dried cannabis flowers. The flames flare green for a heartbeat. The smoke coils upward, tracing invisible patterns. You inhale without thinking, and the world softens. The chants blur into one long, comforting hum. The air tastes earthy and ancient, like soil after rain. You feel your pulse slow, your breath deepen, and that familiar calm from your ancestors' fires returns. But this time, it's on purpose. Historians still argue whether these early rituals were medicinal or mystical. Some say the smoke helped numb pain and soothe fear during long winters. Others insist it was a sacred tool to bridge the seen and unseen worlds. Either way, the plant was no longer just a plant. It had purpose. Mainstream historical fact, ancient hemp seeds and fibers have been found in Neolithic Chinese pottery, showing that humans were cultivating cannabis as early as 10,000 years ago. That's older than writing, older than the pyramids, older than pretty much everything except fire and gossip. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the first bonfires for the dead were basically early hotboxes. Relatives would burn cannabis near the burial site to feed the spirit with fragrance and let mourners breathe the ancestors for comfort. A smoky farewell, ancient style. Outside the ritual tent, the village thrives. Hemp ropes dry on wooden racks, seeds crackle in pans, and woven hemp cloth hangs on lines to bleach under the sun. The plant becomes part of daily life, woven into fishing nets, sandals, mats, and stories. You can almost hear a child laughing as she ties a hemp string around her wrist, believing it brings luck. The community grows, and so does curiosity. You follow a young man carrying a bundle of hemp stalks toward the fields. He points out differences in the plants. Some tall and tough, good for rope. Others shorter, sticky with resin, good for smoke. Selective breeding begins. Humanity, ever the tinkerer, starts improving the high without even knowing what THC is. By now, you've walked thousands of years in just a few breaths. Each village, each generation, refines the ritual. Burning cannabis becomes something more than relaxation. It's identity. When a storm hits, they burn it to calm the gods. When a child is born, they burn it to bless the air. When someone dies, they burn it to ease their passing. The smoke becomes a language, a way of speaking without words. You sit again by another fire, centuries later. The stars look different now, brighter, more familiar. A mother sprinkles crushed hemp flowers into the flames and hums a melody that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. The family breathes together, the smoke curling between them like invisible thread. For a moment, you realize something: cannabis isn't just altering minds, it's weaving people together. And that, maybe, is why it never stopped. Historians still argue whether the first agricultural cannabis was grown for its psychoactive properties or purely for fiber. The evidence keeps shifting like smoke itself, but the rituals tell another story. You can see it in ancient pottery designs, spirals that might represent swirling smoke, or tiny sunbursts carved into stone pipes found in Western China. Those weren't accidents. They were memories carved into clay. Here's a lighter note. Imagine being the first person to realize you could store dried cannabis for months and still get the same mellow feeling later. Ancient Tupperware, if you will. There's probably an unrecorded moment when someone bragged, "Mine's still good from last season," and instantly became history's first weed connoisseur. The world around you changes. Tribes trade with tribes. Seeds travel in pouches and baskets. Along river routes and mountain passes, cannabis follows humanity like a quiet shadow. Every new settlement carries a little bit of the old fire, a little bit of the same smoke. The idea of smoking for peace has already taken root, long before the word peace even exists. As you walk through time, the rituals evolve. Fire pits become clay bowls. Bowls become pipes. Pipes become ornate, carved artifacts with handles shaped like spirits or serpents. Each generation leaves fingerprints of creativity, proof that humans didn't just use cannabis, they celebrated it. In some villages, the ritual is about healing, in others about dreaming. In all of them, it's about feeling closer to nature, to gods, to each other. It's no longer coincidence, it's culture. You sit again near the fire, listening to a shaman's rasping voice. He describes the plant as the breath of the Earth Mother. When burned, it carries human wishes to the heavens. The smoke curls upward, disappearing into the stars. And you wonder, if that's true, maybe those wishes are still floating somewhere up there, glowing faintly between constellations. By now, the scent of burning hemp is the heartbeat of early civilization. It's the smell of survival, of connection, of curiosity. A single puff ties you back to ancestors who discovered not just what the plant does, but what it means. You lean back, the firelight flickering on your face. The sky feels close, almost intimate. In that space between warmth and sleep, you realize the secret. The story of cannabis isn't about intoxication. It's about human imagination. The endless urge to explore what's just beyond ordinary consciousness. And the best part, you've only just started walking that smoky path. Because next, the plant will find new homes among priests, warriors, and emperors. Its scent drifting straight into the rituals of empires. The seed you planted this morning will become the symbol of eternity. You find yourself drifting across centuries again, the campfires of tribes fading behind you as the landscape changes. The air grows colder, sharper, filled with the distant ringing of bronze tools and animal bells. You're standing now in the foothills of the Altai Mountains, surrounded by tents stitched from hides and smoke rising in lazy spirals. This is the home of the shamans, the first true keepers of cannabis magic. You can smell it before you see it. The same sweet, resinous fragrance from Section 2, but stronger, richer. Here, the smoke isn't an accident, or even a simple ritual. It's sacred technology. The shamans call it the plant that opens the sky, and tonight, you're their guest. You kneel on packed earth as the shaman prepares a small bronze bowl. He grinds dried flowers, mixes them with aromatic herbs, and sprinkles the blend into the glowing coals. The tent fills with a soft haze that dances in the lamplight. Around you, people begin to sway, their eyes half closed. You breathe deeply, and the world shifts. The walls seem to ripple like fabric in wind. The fire hums a low, steady tone that seems to pulse with your heartbeat. You're not just watching a ritual. You're part of a transformation. Mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists in Western China have uncovered burial mounds from around 500 BCE containing wooden braziers lined with cannabis residue and stones blackened by heat. The remains show deliberate burning for inhalation, a clear sign that cannabis smoke wasn't incidental anymore. It was central to spiritual ceremony. quirky tidbit in some of those graves, the cannabis flowers were carefully trimmed and stored in felt pouches, as if the departed might need a travel supply for the afterlife. Imagine being buried with your favorite strain. Talk about commitment. The shaman beside you begins to chant in a language older than writing. The rhythm is hypnotic, and the smoke thickens until it feels almost liquid, wrapping your face like a warm scarf. You feel a slow pulse in your temples, a steady rising of inner heat. Around you, the other villagers close their eyes, hands resting on their knees. No one speaks. The only sound is the soft pop of embers and the whisper of breath. You start to notice shapes forming in the smoke. Animals, mountains, maybe even ancestors. The shaman's voice deepens, now layered with something melodic, almost like a lullaby for the universe. His drumbeat syncs perfectly with your heartbeat, and suddenly you feel a strange duality. You're both in your body and far, far away. This is what the shamans meant when they said cannabis opened the sky. It wasn't about euphoria or laughter. It was about access, stepping sideways into a place between the world of earth and the world of spirit. Historians still argue whether these trances were the result of pure cannabis smoke, a mix of herbs, or even breath-induced hallucinations. But what they agree on is that cannabis held a special role. It was the key ingredient for entering what early societies considered the dreaming realm. You peek at the shaman, who sits perfectly still except for his mouth, whispering to something unseen. Maybe he's negotiating with spirits about the next hunt, or healing a sick child by asking the ancestors for guidance. Every puff of smoke feels like a message, every exhale a prayer. When the ritual ends, the people emerge slowly, calm but clear-eyed. No staggering, no chaos. Just quiet smiles and gratitude. You realize this isn't getting high. It's coming home. Outside, the stars are pinpoints of ice across a velvet sky. You step out of the tent, lungs full of cold air, head full of warmth. The camp is silent except for the lowing of distant cattle. The mountains stand like giants in the moonlight, and somewhere among them, fields of wild cannabis sway, ready to be gathered for the next ceremony. Centuries pass again. The same smoke curls upward from new places. Valleys of Persia, forests of India, steppes of Scythia. Everywhere the shamans travel, the ski plant travels too. Its seeds ride in pouches, in saddlebags, tucked into horsehair ropes. And with each journey, new meanings take root. You follow one caravan westward, the rhythmic thud of hooves on frozen earth beneath you. In a small Scythian encampment, warriors gather after battle, not to boast or drink, but to cleanse themselves in a ritual tent. They strip off their armor, heat stones until they glow red, then toss hemp seeds onto the fire. The air fills with dense, spicy vapor. The men inhale deeply, shouting praises to their gods. Herodotus, the curious Greek traveler who witnessed these rites, described it centuries later, noting how they shouted with joy as they bathed in the fumes. That's your historical anchor for the night. Even classical writers documented the use of cannabis smoke as a spiritual cleanser. You imagine the scene: thick smoke, laughter echoing, sweat dripping from bronze, scarred bodies. No wonder ancient historians thought the Scythians were a little unhinged. But to them, this wasn't recreation, it was renewal. You wander among them, invisible, feeling the steam prickle your skin. Someone presses a handful of seeds into your palm and grins. You toss them onto the coals, and for a moment, you're part of the ritual. Another traveler adding your breath to the ancient rhythm. Later, as night falls and the fires burn low, the shamans tell stories of a ski road, a bridge made of smoke connecting humans to divine forces. They say that without it, dreams wander aimlessly, never reaching the heavens. You watch the smoke rise, curling toward constellations that look suspiciously familiar. Maybe it's the same sky you see now, just with fewer satellites. A light joke bubbles up. If these ancient shamans were alive today, they'd probably have YouTube channels called Smokes and Spirits Ancient Trance Hacks. The comments section would be chaos. The next morning, the ritual continues in smaller, quieter ways. Mothers burn bits of dried hemp in the hearth to bless newborns. Hunters carry hemp cords braided with feathers for protection. The plant isn't just sacred anymore, it's integrated. Daily life and divine life are one continuous breath. You walk with a young apprentice shaman who shows you a pouch of dried flowers, resin glinting in the sunlight. He explains that the plant listens, that each harvest must be done gently, with songs. If you hurt it, he says softly, it forgets the sky. You nod, wondering if he's right. Maybe the reason cannabis works so well with humans is that we learned to approach it with respect before we ever sought pleasure from it. Historians still argue whether this respect came from religious awe or simple gratitude for a useful plant. But either way, the bond stuck. The ritual spread across continents, carried by wind, trade, and memory. By the time you reach the foothills of India, the air smells different. Thicker, spiced, sacred. Monks crush hemp into butter, mix it with milk and herbs, and sip it slowly as they meditate. Bang, they call it. To them, it's not just a drink, it's a key to the divine. The same plant, new expression. You smile at the continuity. Every culture finds its own rhythm with cannabis, but the melody never changes. The smoke, the calm, the connection. It's the same song, sung in different tongues. As night deepens, you sit again by a fire. The stars shimmer overhead, timeless as ever. The air tastes faintly sweet, the way it did back in those first human camps. Somewhere behind you, a drum begins to thump. Slow, steady, ancient. You close your eyes and let the rhythm wash through you. This, you realize, is how humanity learned to breathe together. To share not just air, but intention. The shamans taught us that smoke can be sacred, that stillness can be loud, that sometimes, to see farther, you just have to let your mind drift a little. And as the fire dies down, the embers glow red like the eyes of sleeping gods. You feel the story stretching ahead of you, through empires, temples, and beyond. The journey isn't over. It's barely begun. You blink, and the stars above the shaman's tents dissolve into daylight over stone cities. The air is thicker now, warm, perfumed, heavy with human ambition. You've drifted into the era of empires, where the smoke that once carried prayers through tents now curls through palaces and temples. The plant has grown up alongside civilization itself. You're standing in Mesopotamia, the cradle of organized everything, laws, writing, taxes, and, yes, herbs burned in gold bowls for the gods. The streets hum with barter and sweat. Clay tablets dry on rooftops, etched with wedge-shaped symbols. Records of trade, harvests and rituals. Among them, somewhere, are mentions of hemp Kwanabu in Sumerian, the ancestor of our word cannabis. It's listed as a sacred plant, a healer, a purifier, sometimes even an incense for ceremonies to drive away evil spirits. Mainstream historical fact. Cuneiform texts from the first millennium BCE describe cannabis used medicinally and ritually in Mesopotamia. Crushed, soaked, and smoked. It was prescribed by temple healers for sorrow, fever, and to banish ghosts. You wander through one of those temples now. The marble floor feels cool beneath your feet. A priest mixes oils and herbs beside an altar, chanting under his breath. The air is rich with frankincense and myrrh. But beneath that, you catch that same earthy, familiar sweetness. Cannabis smoke drifts lazily toward the ceiling, curling like a soft question mark in the air. You breathe in. The sound of the marketplace outside fades. The noise of the city, the heat, the heartbeat of empire, all dissolve. The smoke takes you somewhere else. The priest murmurs, to calm the mind, to quiet the heart. He believes the gods live in stillness, And that smoke is the ladder leading there. You smile. The shamans would have approved. You step outside, blinking against the sun. Dust swirls through the streets, carrying the scent of the river and the market. Traders shout, goats bleat, potters spin clay. Hemp fibers hang drying on wooden racks near the river. Ropes, nets, even sandals made from the same plant, once burned for visions. The sacred has become practical. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians actually smoked cannabis as we do now, or if they used it in poultices and incense. But when you see that faint smoke rising from temple altars, it's hard not to imagine priests and patients alike inhaling its calm by accident. Or maybe not so accidentally. The story follows the rivers eastward, into the vast lands of India and China, where the plant takes on new identities. You cross into India first, your feet sinking into warm, red earth. The air hums with chants, the clang of temple bells, the sweet burn of ghee lamps. Here, cannabis isn't just medicine, it's divinity itself. The Atharva Veda, one of India's oldest sacred texts, written around 1000 BCE, calls it one of the 5 sacred plants and refers to it as a source of happiness, a liberator. You walk among saffron, robed priests who grind green leaves and flowers into a thick paste, mixing it with milk and spices to make bhang. They drink it during festivals to honor Shiva, the god of transformation, whose matted hair is said to drip with cannabis resin, the herb of compassion, they call it. A bridge between thought and silence. A young monk smiles at you, holding out a small clay cup. You hesitate, then sip. The flavor is sweet and earthy, the texture creamy. Within minutes, the noise of the crowd fades into a soft hum. You don't feel dizzy, just present. The colors around you deepen. The orange of robes glows richer, the bells echo longer. For a moment, you feel what the monks mean a quiet unity, the sense that the world is breathing with you. Quirky tidbit, in some early Hindu rituals, worshippers believed Shiva himself gifted cannabis to humans after realizing it could bring meditation and compassion into balance. A cosmic, here, you'll need this, moment. The same plant crosses north, carried by nomads into China, where it takes root in fields and pharmacies. You wander through a small Chinese village during the time of the legendary Emperor Shen Nung, around 2700 BCE, if legends are to be believed. He's said to have catalogued hundreds of medicinal plants, including cannabis, in the herbal scrolls attributed to him. Ma is described as balancing yin and yang, healing pain, and soothing the spirit. It's brewed into teas, crushed into oils, and even mixed into wine. The psychoactive element. That's a side effect, politely ignored, but quietly appreciated. Mainstream historical fact. Cannabis appears in the Pen-Tizo Ching, the ancient Chinese pharmacopoeia, as a treatment for constipation, rheumatism, and malaria. You walk past a healer's shop now. Dried herbs hang from rafters. Paper lanterns sway in the breeze. The doctor, a quiet old man with long white hair, pours you a cup of greenish tea. It's bitter but calming. Everything in balance, he says softly. Too much heat. Too much cold. This brings harmony. Historians still argue whether the Chinese ever used cannabis for ritual intoxication or strictly for healing. The truth is likely both, because balance, after all, applies to body and spirit alike. You step outside into a field where rows of hemp plants sway under the sun, their leaves rustling softly. Farmers bend at the waist, cutting and tying bundles. This isn't mystical, it's industry. Rope, paper, clothing. The first currency of civilization isn't gold or silver. It's fiber, hemp fiber. And yet, somewhere behind a village wall, you catch that telltale smell again. Smoke rising from a courtyard where someone is quietly burning dried flowers. A small, private ritual. A moment of peace stolen from the business of empire. You close your eyes and breathe it in, imagining how this same smoke connects all the people you've met so far. Tribes, shamans, priests, healers, farmers. Different worlds, same ritual. Here's a light joke for you. If ancient traders had social media, the Silk Road would have been full of Fey blessed, Fey high vebs only, posts with little hemp, leaf emojis. Because, of course, they were exporting both cloth and calm. You can almost feel the wind shifting westward now, carrying the scent of burning hemp across deserts and mountains. It crosses Persia, where Zoroastrian priests call it banka, and use it to reach the divine light during prayer. It mingles with incense in Egyptian tombs, where pharaohs seek eternal dreams beneath painted stars. It seeps into African rituals, traveling down the Nile, whispering across trade routes lined with gold and salt. In one Egyptian chamber, the air is still, thick with centuries. A funerary priest lights a brazier near a mummy wrapped in linen. Among the perfumes and oils lies a pinch of dried cannabis mixed with blue lotus and myrrh. He wafts the smoke toward the sarcophagus, murmuring prayers of protection. Mainstream historical fact. Traces of cannabis pollen and resin have been found in Egyptian mummies, suggesting its use in both medicine and mortuary ritual. The smoke curls upward, touching painted constellations on the ceiling, the same stars that watched over your first campfire. You exhale slowly, realizing you've just witnessed cannabis rise from campfire ember to empire incense. The plant has become both divine and domestic, both sacred and simple. Every civilization finds its own way to justify the same comfort, the peace that comes from watching smoke drift away. Historians still argue what drove its spread most: trade, religion, or simple human curiosity. But maybe the reason it spread so fast, is simpler. People everywhere crave the same thing: a little calm in the chaos. You take one last look at the golden smoke swirling around temple lamps and say quietly, "We're not done yet." Because next, the plant will pass through hands of pharaohs, philosophers, and soldiers, weaving through history like a thread of light in the fog. You drift again, this time over deserts and mountain passes, across rivers glowing gold under the sun. You're following the smoke itself, like a traveler tracing scent instead of stars. The map beneath you unrolls. Persia, Egypt, Greece. Each civilization inherits the plant, reshapes it, renames it, but never forgets its quiet power. Your feet touch the sand of ancient Persia, around 1000 BCE. The wind hums through dry canyons, and you see white-robed priests gathered in a fire temple, their faces glowing in the light of sacred flame. They call the plant bangha, a drink prepared from its leaves and resin, used not for recreation, but revelation. Mainstream historical fact. In the Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism, Hauma and Banga are divine intoxicants. Scholars debate which ingredients they contained, but many point to cannabis as one. Ritual texts describe priests drinking it to see truth and light, and commune with Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom. One priest hands you a clay bowl of greenish brew. For the clarity of mind, he whispers, you sip. It's bitter, earthy, and warm. Within moments, the fire before you seems to shimmer. You understand why ancient Persians believed intoxication could be sacred. Not escape, but access. They weren't trying to forget. They were trying to remember. The smoke curls around the temple pillars, like the shape of a prayer. You realize you've seen this pattern before, in shamans' tents, Mesopotamian sanctuaries, and Indian temples. The flame changes, the names change, but the act remains the same: inhale, exhale, ascend. You walk outside into a desert night. Caravans stretch to the horizon, torches flickering, camels swaying under the weight of silk, spices, and hemp sacks. This is the Silk Road, the great artery of ancient civilization. Traders shout in dozens of languages, coins clink, and smoke drifts from small fires where travelers share food and herbs. Quirky tidbit. Historians believe cannabis moved west along these trade routes, not only as a crop, but as culture. Brought by Scythian nomads, who smoked it during funerary and victory rituals. Herodotus, The Greek historian later described them, howling with pleasure, in hemp-filled tents. You see it now, a circle of Scythians on the steppe, their horses grazing nearby, their bodies tattooed with swirling animal patterns. They toss hemp seeds onto hot stones inside a small tent, sealing the flaps shut. The smoke grows thick and sweet. Their shouts turn to laughter, then to silence. Mainstream historical fact. Archaeological finds from Scythian burial mounds, kurgans in Siberia, and the Altai Mountains include gold cups with traces of cannabis and opium, along with burnt hemp seeds and braziers, evidence of ceremonial smoking around 500 BCE. You step inside one of those tents, eyes watering, lungs warm. The air vibrates. The Scythian beside you grins and says something that sounds like a blessing or a joke. You're not sure which. For a brief moment, you understand his world without needing words: life, death, smoke, silence. The scene fades, replaced by the white marble columns of ancient Greece. Philosophers stroll through courtyards, scrolls under arm, sandals whispering over stone. In the corner of a market, a merchant sells a plant called cannabis. Its fibers used for ropes and sails. Sailors love it. It keeps their ships alive. But doctors know another secret. Mainstream historical fact. Greek physicians like Dioscorides and Galen described cannabis as a medicine for ear pain, inflammation, and melancholy. It was mixed with wine, olive oil, or honey, and prescribed in small doses. You find yourself in the study of Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He's writing on a wax tablet, muttering to himself. You glance over his shoulder and read. Pain of the joints. Apply poultice of hemp and warm oil. The plant has left the temple and entered the clinic. Nearby, students debate in the agora. One of them, a bearded man with eyes full of mischief, quotes a line from Herodotus about Scythians smoking hemp to reach ecstasy. The others laugh. "Savages!" Someone scoffs. Another replies, "Maybe philosophers could use some of that clarity." You chuckle. Some arguments never change. You wander toward the docks. Ships sway against the pier, their sails woven from hemp. Without this plant, Greece wouldn't sail, Rome wouldn't conquer, and history wouldn't move. The sacred has become structural, the divine now drives the practical. And yet, behind a tavern, you see sailors huddled around a clay pot, burning hemp seeds for fun. Laughter fills the night air. The smoke dances upward, mingling with the scent of roasted fish and sea salt. You realize, even when civilizations call it sacred or medicinal, people will always find a way to make it human, to make it joyful. From Greece, the wind carries you across the Mediterranean, into Egypt once again, this time under Greek and Roman rule. The temples are older now, but the rituals continue. Cannabis still lingers in medicinal papyri, mixed with honey for sore eyes, boiled into oil for childbirth pain. The plant refuses to vanish, it adapts, shape shifts, survives. Mainstream historical fact. The Ebers papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, and later Greek Egyptian texts mention shimshimet, a plant widely believed to be cannabis, used in ointments for inflammation and fevers. You find yourself in a perfumer's shop in Alexandria. Glass jars glitter in the lamplight, each filled with amber oils and dried flowers. A woman crushes hemp seeds into a fine paste, stirring it into perfumed wine. For rest, she says softly. For dreams. Outside, the city hums. The library, the scholars, the merchants. Somewhere on a balcony above, a philosopher watches smoke curl into the sunset and wonders if truth might just be hidden in that haze. The Mediterranean night falls, heavy and gold. You breathe in one last time. The air smells of sea salt, frankincense, and something familiar, soft, ancient, eternal. You realize the plant has now crossed continents and cultures, yet its meaning remains connection, balance, peace. Historians will argue forever whether the ancients were getting high or simply healing. But you've seen it. It was both. Maybe they didn't separate the two. Maybe peace itself was medicine. You turn toward the horizon, where the lights of Rome flicker. The story isn't done. The plant will soon pass into the hands of emperors, soldiers, and poets. It will build sails for conquest, and soothe the conqueror's wounds after. The smoke rises again, stretching westward, like a bridge of history made of breath. You follow the smoke westward, as if the wind itself is guiding you. The desert sand gives way to marble courtyards and bustling ports, where the air smells of olive oil, sea salt, and something faintly herbal drifting from bronze braziers. You're in the Greco-Roman world, where reason and ritual share a table, and sometimes a pipe. You pass under white columns into a forum filled with philosophers mid-argument. One declares that the mind is the only true vessel of knowledge. Another points toward the burning brazier nearby and says, "Then why do we seek wisdom through fumes?" You can't help but smirk. Humanity's longest debate, what's medicine, what's vice, has already begun. Mainstream historical fact, in ancient Greece and Rome, hemp, cannabis, was widely cultivated for rope, sails, and medicine. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote that the plant could soothe earaches and ease stiffness in joints, though overuse dulls the mind. Even the physician Dioscorides included it in De Materia Medica, his foundational pharmacopoeia, calling it both useful and potentially stupefying. You stroll through a Roman villa at dusk. The floors gleam with mosaics, and in the courtyard, servants grind seeds into oil. One of them tells you that their master uses it on sore muscles after training in the gymnasium. "It works better than wine," she adds, grinning. You imagine Roman athletes rubbing hemp oil on their bodies after sparring, the scent of earth and sweat mingling under torchlight. A scholar nearby raises his cup of wine and muses. Strange, isn't it? A plant used to bind ships, heal wounds, and perhaps unbind the mind. He chuckles. The gods must love contradictions. You take a seat, watching smoke curl up from the brazier, where dried hemp leaves smolder beside sage and pine resin. A flute player begins a slow tune, the melody soft and looping, hypnotic. You feel the world around you slow to the same rhythm. Quirky tidbit. Some historians think Roman bathhouses may have included herbal steam rooms that used hemp infusions, not just for relaxation but for mild intoxication. A social haze before dinner and debate. You wander outside, and Rome's streets unfold before you like veins under the skin. Markets roar with life. Fishmongers shouting, spice traders haggling, and soldiers swaggering through with armor clinking. You notice hemp rope coiled around every dock post, every sailboat. Without it, Rome's empire would have stayed landlocked. Hemp doesn't just lift the spirit, it moves empires. At the harbor, sailors lounge beside their ships, tossing dice and laughing. One of them grinds something between his fingers, small, green, and sticky. It keeps the nerves calm, he tells you, before the sea swallows you whole. You watch him toss it into a small clay pipe, light it, and exhale toward the stars. He offers you the stem with a wink. The gods won't mind. The smoke tastes ancient, bitter yet familiar. It settles in your lungs like a secret. You wonder whether Julius Caesar ever tried this before battle, whether Cleopatra's ships smelled faintly of hemp, rope and resin when they sailed the Nile. Historians still argue whether cannabis in Rome was ever smoked recreationally, or only pressed into oils and tinctures. But as you drift among sailors and merchants, sharing the same glowing ember, you know what you're seeing. Human nature repeating itself, finding calm in chaos. You leave the harbor behind and follow the road north. The Mediterranean warmth fades to chill wind as you reach Gaul and Britannia, Roman provinces where hemp grows wild along riverbanks. Soldiers stationed on the frontier burn it in campfires, maybe for warmth, maybe for the same comfort their ancestors found in ritual. One night, you sit beside a Roman legionary staring into the flames. "Back home," he says quietly, We burn this stuff when we miss our families. The smoke smells like peace. He tosses another handful onto the fire, and both of you sit in silence, watching the night blur slightly around the edges. When morning comes, you ride east again, tracing trade routes that stretch into Central Asia. The Scythian trails you walked earlier have become Roman highways, dotted with caravanserais where cultures blend and ideas travel faster than horses. Mainstream historical fact: cannabis seeds and hemp fibers have been found in Roman archaeological sites across Europe, from Britain to Germany, confirming that cultivation spread widely under imperial trade. Rome's demand for rope, textiles, and medicine made hemp one of the most economically important plants in the ancient world. At one roadside inn, you overhear Greek merchants debating medicine with an Indian traveler. The Greek praises opium, the Indian swears by bhang, a cannabis drink. The two begin laughing, trading stories of their respective highs, and eventually agree on one thing. The gods gave us both plants. They knew we'd need help surviving ourselves. You raise your cup to that. The Roman world is beginning to fray. You can feel it in the air, the decadence, the exhaustion, the craving for escape. Philosophers write about virtue, while emperors drown in indulgence. Somewhere in a villa garden, a poet lies beneath a laurel tree, eyes half closed, describing the drifting smoke of the mind's rest. Maybe it's incense. Maybe it's something more. Quirky tidbit. The poet Ovid once joked that love was like smoke. It clouded the eyes and confused the senses. Some scholars, reading his work centuries later, wondered if that metaphor might have been more literal than poetic. By now, you've realized cannabis has slipped beneath history's floorboards. It's everywhere and nowhere, woven into rope, brewed into oil, burned in secret. It's legal and illicit at once, saint and sinner in the same breath. As the centuries turn, you stand on a hill overlooking the empire. Rome's fires glow in the distance, bright and temporary. You inhale, exhale, and whisper, this will outlast them. When Rome finally falls, hemp will still be growing along the rivers, wild and resilient. Barbarians will pluck its stalks for rope, monks will grind its seeds into lamp oil, and forgotten farmers will roll its leaves into makeshift remedies. Historians still argue whether cannabis truly shaped civilization, or merely drifted along beside it. But as the wind carries that same faint scent across time, you know the answer: it shaped us quietly, strand by strand, fiber by breath. The marble fades, smoke becomes mist, torches turn into stars. You're moving forward again, into the dark centuries, where the plant hides in monasteries, mystic poetry, and medicine chests, waiting for rediscovery. You take one last look at the Roman night and smile. The gods may have left, but the smoke never did. You open your eyes to the sound of hooves, bells, and wind. The Roman roads beneath your feet have dissolved into dusty caravan trails. Silk flutters from wooden carts, and bronze coins gleam in calloused palms. The Silk Road stretches before you, an endless ribbon of trade, gossip, and smoke that ties the world together. You're standing at the edge of Samarkand, the beating heart of Central Asia. The air hums with languages you can't name: Chinese silk, Indian spices, Persian carpets, and tiny sacks of hemp change hands with a smile and a story. One merchant calls it ganja, another bang, another ma. They argue over which is stronger, sweeter, or holier, like sommeliers comparing wine vintages. Mainstream historical fact: by 500 CE, cannabis was cultivated across Central and South Asia, traded along Silk Road routes from China to the Mediterranean. Archaeological finds in Xinjiang and Turpan, northwestern China, include hemp clothing, seeds, and smoking equipment. Evidence that the plant traveled not just as a commodity, but as culture. You follow a caravan through the Altai Mountains, their peaks sharp as knives, air thin enough to taste. Every stop along the route, the same ritual: unpack, boil water, brew tea. And for the few who can afford it, light a little hemp resin pressed into clay bowls. You crouch near a fire as a traveler grins and offers you a puff. It makes the journey shorter, he says, or at least makes you forget how long it is. You inhale. The smoke carries the scent of cedar and snow. The mountains don't look smaller, but somehow they feel friendlier. You imagine countless travelers, through centuries doing the same, finding comfort in smoke when the world felt endless. Historians still argue whether Silk Road cannabis was mainly industrial hemp or potent psychoactive strains. But the evidence suggests both. People found ways to separate the fiber from the flower, the rope from the ritual. Two sides of the same leaf. The caravan crests a ridge, and you see a Buddhist monastery tucked against a cliff. Monks in red robes chant over bowls of fragrant smoke that smell suspiciously familiar. Inside, murals show painted bodhisattvas holding lotus flowers, and next to one, a green plant with serrated leaves, curling like a halo. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Chinese texts such as the Pentizo Qing, compiled circa 100 CE, list cannabis among superior medicines, said to lighten the body and prolong life. Taoist mystics burned it as incense in meditative rituals. You speak with the spirits. You kneel among the monks, the chants vibrating through your chest. A young monk leans close and whispers. The smoke quiets the noise in here, tapping his forehead. You smile, same reason people light up thousands of years later. The human brain hasn't changed, it just has Wi-Fi now. From the monastery, you descend into India, where cannabis is no longer a traveler's novelty. It's a deity's gift. You arrive during a festival, the air thick with drum beats, flowers and incense. Pilgrims smear ash on their foreheads and drink a green, milky potion from clay cups. They call it bang. Mainstream historical fact. Cannabis appears in the Atharva Veda, one of Hinduism's oldest sacred texts, circa 1500-1000 BCE, as one of the 5 sacred plants, a source of happiness, joy, giver liberator. Bhang, a cannabis drink mixed with milk, ghee, and spices, has been consumed for millennia, especially during the festival of Holi. You accept a cup from a smiling sadhu, his beard streaked with ash and paint. Shiva's favorite, he says. The drink is cool, creamy, slightly sweet. The world tilts gently, colors blooming deeper. Around you, worshippers dance, laugh and cry, all at once. Historians still argue whether ancient Indians used cannabis primarily for worship or for healing. The text blur the lines. One describes it as relieving anxiety, another as opening the gates of heaven. You take another sip and decide. It's probably both. As night falls, you find yourself sitting beside the Ganges River, its surface silver under the moon. Across the water, fires flicker, each one a small universe of music, smoke, and memory. You realize cannabis isn't just a plant here, it's a language, one that bridges gods and humans, body and spirit. The next morning, you join a caravan heading west again. Along the way, you meet Persian mystics, Sufi wanderers wrapped in patched cloaks, their eyes bright with peace. Around a campfire, one of them hums a slow melody, turning words into vapor. He sprinkles something into the flame. The smoke smells sweet floral. This is the smoke of remembrance, he says. It makes the heart lighter, so it can rise. A quirky tidbit. Some early Sufi orders in Persia and North Africa used cannabis as an aid to meditation and prayer, long before it became stigmatized. They called it hashish, from the Arabic hash shah, meaning herb. It was not yet the outlaw's indulgence. It was the ascetic's key to inner silence. You close your eyes, and the campfire becomes stars again. You've watched the plant travel from shaman tents to temples, from tombs to trade routes. It's been sacred, scandalous, and secretly ordinary. The Silk Road isn't just a path for goods. It's a neural network of humanity, carrying stories, songs, and smoke. Now, As you follow the caravans westward into Persia and Arabia, the plant begins to change names and meanings again. Hashish becomes poetry, whispered between mystics. You can almost hear the early verses forming in the night air. Praise, longing, laughter. Historians still argue where hashish truly originated. Some say Central Asia, others Egypt or Persia. But you suspect it was born in a dozen fires at once. Wherever humans wanted to feel the edge of the invisible, you travel onward towards cities glowing on the horizon. Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, where empires of ink and smoke will rise. For now, you just keep walking, your robe smelling faintly of the same scent that's followed you since prehistory. As dawn breaks, you pause and look back over the mountains. The Silk Road winds behind you like a green thread stitched across time. You exhale one long, lazy breath. It feels ancient, endless, and home. You awaken to the sound of running water and the call to prayer. The caravan behind you has vanished, replaced by a new dawn over Baghdad, glittering like a mirage. The year is around 1000 CE. The streets hum with philosophy, poetry, and perfumed smoke. The Islamic Golden Age has turned cities into libraries and libraries into galaxies of thought. You wander through narrow alleys where spice merchants chant their wares. Cardamom, myrrh, saffron, and a curious resin called hashish. It's not contraband here. It's curiosity, used by some, feared by others. The scent floats above the city, mingling with rosewater and ink. Mainstream historical fact. During the 9th to 13th centuries, cannabis resin, hashish, was widespread in the Middle East, particularly among Sufi mystics and scholars. Medical texts like those of Ibn Sina, Avicenna noted cannabis for its pain, relieving and anti-inflammatory effects, while others warned against excessive use, linking it to forgetfulness. You duck into a courtyard where scholars debate the soul's nature. One of them, a man with ink-stained fingers, stirs a cup of tea and says, "Perhaps forgetfulness is mercy." His friend smirks. Or maybe it's just the herb talking. Everyone laughs softly, even the servants. Beyond them, in quieter corners of the city, mystics gather. You find a group of Sufis beneath an apricot tree, spinning and humming in circles. Their leader, an old man with eyes like deep wells, invites you closer. "The smoke," he says, as a faint curl rises from a bowl of amber resin, "is not for forgetting, but for remembering God." He takes a long, slow breath. It clears the dust from the mirror of the heart. A quirky tidbit. Early Sufis called cannabis the friend of the poor, a plant that made the humble man's spirit soar like a king's. It was shared in secret gatherings where poetry, prayer, and laughter blended into something transcendent. You close your eyes. The chanting rises, the world slows. The smoke feels gentle, grounding. Every sound becomes a rhythm, every thought a wave. You understand now how mystics could see divine unity in such a simple plant. Historians still argue whether hashish was truly embraced by Sufis or vilified by mainstream clerics. Both are true. Some saw it as a path to spiritual clarity, others as a distraction. But as you sit beneath that apricot tree, the truth feels simpler, intention shapes meaning. Time shifts again. The desert heat melts into cool stone walls. You find yourself in a medieval apothecary. Glass jars lined neatly, filled with herbs from every corner of the known world. A bearded physician in a long robe grinds cannabis leaves into powder. "For the nerves," he explains, "and the sleepless." Mainstream historical fact. Islamic medical scholars such as Al-Razi, Razis, and Al-Biruni recorded cannabis as useful in treating epilepsy, digestive issues, and melancholy. Though they cautioned against excessive delight, they acknowledged its value in moderation. You watch as he mixes the powder with honey and rose oil, forming small fragrant pills. He slides one toward you. "Take this only if your heart feels too heavy." You do, and the sweetness lingers on your tongue long after the bitterness fades. You wander onward, through centuries, Empires rise and fall, Abbasids, Fatimids, Ottomans. And yet the plant remains. It hides in poetry, in medicine, in music. Every culture gives it a new costume, a new story. You reach Cairo, where in the 13th century, hashish cafes bloom like wildflowers after rain. Men gather under lanterns, puffing smoke rings into the night while arguing about fate. The laughter echoes through alleys. Quirky tidbit. The earliest known hashish clubs appeared in Egypt around the 1200s. Despite religious crackdowns, they survived underground, becoming symbols of quiet rebellion. Chroniclers even note that some soldiers preferred hashish to alcohol, for it steadies the hand without clouding the eyes. You take a seat in one of these cafes. The air is hazy and sweet. A musician plucks a lute, singing about lost love and divine mercy in the same breath. You take a puff offered by the man beside you, a farmer, his hands rough, his grin easy. Life is short, he says, exhaling slowly. Why waste it worrying about kings? You laugh, half from the smoke, half from the truth of it. Outside, history turns another page. The Crusades rage across continents. While swords clash, ideas and herbs flow quietly in both directions. European knights returning from the East carry stories of strange resins and sleeping herbs. Some even smuggle seeds. You can almost see the invisible thread stretching west once more. Historians still argue whether cannabis reached medieval Europe through trade, war, or medicine. But you know by now, it was probably all three. You walk north through Byzantium, past monasteries where monks press hemp oil for lamps and parchment ink. The sacred flame that once burned in shaman tents now glows in cathedrals. Yet somewhere in the quiet cloisters, a monk stirs crushed hemp into his broth to ease a headache. He smiles as the world softens. By the time you reach Venice, the 14th century dawns. Ships rock gently in the lagoon, their sails woven from hemp. The same plant that lit mystic hearts now powers merchant fleets. Humanity's dependence on it, spiritual, industrial, emotional, has woven itself too deep to undo. Mainstream historical fact. Hemp was essential to European naval power. From ropes to sails to caulking, no ship could sail without it. Even the Venetian arsenal, Europe's greatest shipyard, consumed tons of hemp each year. You step aboard a merchant ship as it creaks out of the harbour, bound for Genoa. Sailors hum sea shanties, their fingers stained green from twisting hemp fibres. At night, one of them sneaks to the bow with a small clay pipe, shielding it from the wind. You join him. My father said this herb came from the east. He murmurs. He said the wise men they use it to see God. I just use it to forget the waves. The stars glitter like oil lamps above the sea. The smoke rises, curling into constellations. Somewhere in the dark, a gull cries. You exhale and smile. You realize something profound beneath the ship's groaning timbers. The plant has become a mirror of humanity itself. Healer and rebel, holy and humble, punished and praised. As dawn blushes over the Adriatic, the sailor beside you whispers, "It helps me feel small in a good way." You nod. You understand. You watch the coastline appear. Europe, colonization, science, will change everything. But the ember will survive. It always does. The wind shifts, carrying the same scent across centuries. You breathe in deeply, steady and calm, ready to follow it again. The year is now 1492, and the world is tilting. Empires are colliding. Oceans are no longer barriers. They are promises. You stand in Seville, Spain, where the docks buzz with rumor and ambition. Ships are being loaded with iron, wool, wine, and bundles of hemp rope coiled like sleeping serpents. The age of exploration has begun. The sails that will carry Columbus across the Atlantic are woven entirely from hemp. The ropes, the rigging, the caulking, all depend on the same plant that once graced ancient temples and mystic gatherings. The sailors laugh and curse as they work, unaware that they are binding continents together with threads of history. Mainstream historical fact. Hemp was indispensable to maritime expansion. Each ship required roughly 60-80 tons of hemp for ropes and sails. Without it, the European age of discovery would have been impossible. You watch as sailors chew hemp seeds for energy, spitting shells into the tide. One jokes that they'll grow a garden in the ocean. He doesn't know how right he is. The plant will soon find new soil, new sun, on the other side of the world. When the Niger, Pinta, and Santa Maria set sail, you're on the deck. The wind howls through hemp sails that groan like tired lungs. The sea swells beneath you, and you smell salt, sweat, and the faint earthy sweetness of rope fibers. Every knot, every stitch, is a quiet echo of the plant's ancient lineage. Weeks pass. The sailors grow restless. The ship's doctor offers them hemp oil to soothe sunburn and sore muscles. One night, under a half-moon, a sailor rolls a tiny ember of hemp in parchment, an experiment, a memory of home, and smokes quietly beside the barrels. You watch the smoke drift upward like a prayer. When land appears at last, a glimmer on the horizon, the world changes forever. You step onto soil that will one day be called the Americas, and the first seeds of hemp are already tucked into crates below deck. Mainstream historical fact: hemp was among the first European crops introduced to the Americas. It was prized for its versatility, used for rope, paper, and even clothing by settlers and indigenous communities alike. You travel north through time again. The 16th century hums with reformations and revolutions. Hemp fields stretch across Europe, green and golden under the sun. In England, Queen Elizabeth I commands her subjects to grow hemp. For the strength of the realm. It is a matter of national security. Every ship needs it. Quirky tidbit: in the 1500s, farmers who refused to grow hemp could be fined. The plant was so vital that it became a patriotic duty, woven into the empire's fabric, literally and figuratively. You walk through one of these fields, the stalks taller than men. Workers sing folk songs as they harvest. The fibers squeak under their fingers. You pick up a strand and twist it. It's strong, unbreakable, like the continuity of human need. Then, in a small London workshop, you meet a printer. He dips his pen into ink and smiles proudly. "This paper," he says, tapping a fresh sheet, "is made from hemp rag." He's printing Shakespeare's early sonnets, the words of human passion pressed into hemp's patient flesh. Mainstream historical fact: much of the world's paper, from Gutenberg's Bible to Shakespeare's manuscripts, was made from hemp fiber. It was durable, cheap, and long-lasting. As you turn the pages, the smell of ink and fiber fills the air. The written word, the plant, and human thought, intertwined again. You travel next to France, where scholars debate philosophy and alchemists whisper about green elixirs. Among them, you meet Franois Rabelais, the Renaissance writer who creates the fictional herb Pantagruelian, a thinly veiled ode to hemp. He winks as he writes, "No plant is more useful to mankind." A mainstream historical fact: Rabelais's Pantagruelian, of 1532, was indeed a celebration of hemp. Disguised as fiction to avoid censorship, he described its uses in clothing, medicine, and even spiritual symbolism. From Europe's salons to its shipyards, hemp is everywhere, binding parchment, curing pain, launching fleets. It is the silent backbone of civilization. But as you approach the 17th century, the world darkens. Colonial powers turn greedier, exploiting land and people alike. Hemp becomes an imperial crop, its cultivation forced upon enslaved laborers in the Caribbean and North America. The plant that once symbolized freedom now grows in chains. You stand on a plantation, the sun blistering above. Workers bend in the fields, their hands calloused from stripping stalks. The overseer shouts, "The air tastes of ash." It's a sobering truth: even nature's gifts can be twisted by power. Mainstream historical fact: in the 1600s and 1700s, hemp was a key cash crop in the Americas, often cultivated by enslaved Africans under brutal conditions. its production was central to colonial economies. You walk away from the field, heart heavy, and find a small riverside camp, where a man sits by firelight. He hums softly, a freedom song. He burns a small bundle of dried hemp leaves, not as medicine, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. The smoke rises, defiant. Centuries of suffering, yet the plant persists. It endures as people do. By the 18th century, the tide begins to turn again. Across the Atlantic, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grow hemp at Mount Vernon and Monticello. Washington writes in his journal, "Make the most of the Indian hemp seed." Sow it everywhere. A quirky tidbit, early drafts of the US Constitution were likely written on hemp paper. For a brief moment, the plant regains its dignity, seen once again as an emblem of independence and utility. You walk through the fields of Virginia, the summer air thick with the scent of resin. The revolution has begun, and the same ropes that once bound ships of empire now tie together a new republic. The irony is not lost on you. A plant once used by kings now fuels the dreams of rebels. As fireworks burst over a newborn nation, you look to the sky. The smoke spirals upward, merging with the stars. The thread continues, ancient, green, eternal. The next era waits, shimmering just beyond the horizon. The industrial age, the age of science, and the slow, strange fall of hemp from grace. The world is about to forget what it once knew by heart. The wind grows still. You feel the shift. You wake to the gentle flicker of a Victorian candle flame, its light bending and trembling against polished brass mirrors. The year is somewhere around 1840, and London hums beneath a thick fog that smells faintly of coal, perfume, and rain. You stand in a parlour, a cosy, velvet, draped chamber, where the city's intellectual elite sip tea, whisper about the soul, and secretly chase transcendence through tinctures. On the polished table, before you rests a small green bottle labelled Cannabis Indica Extract Park. Davis & Co. The apothecary's pride. A few drops under the tongue, and aches fade. The world softens, and the edges of thought blur into pleasant wonder. Mainstream historical fact. Cannabis tinctures were a staple of 19th century Western medicine. British physician William O'Shaughnessy introduced cannabis to Europe after observing its medical uses in India. It became a standard treatment for insomnia, pain, and even epilepsy. You tilt the bottle, watching the liquid catch the lamplight. Its scent is earthy, slightly floral, an echo of ancient temples and campfires. The host, a balding gentleman in a silk waistcoat, raises an eyebrow. "Curious, isn't it?" he says. The same plant used by mystics is now prescribed by doctors. Progress, they call it. You nod, though you know that irony runs deeper. In the drawing rooms of empire, people chase the same dream their ancestors once did around sacred fires. Peace, sleep, escape. Only now it's bottled and taxed. You stroll through the London streets, where gas lamps glow like captive moons. Pharmacies advertise extract of Indian hemp beside cough syrups and tonics. Posters promise relief from female troubles, melancholia, and neuralgia. It's the age of invention, and cannabis, rebranded and respectable, has found a new identity. Yet, even among polished gentlemen, curiosity stirs. Across Europe, artists and poets begin to taste the unknown. You find yourself in Paris 1844, stepping into a smoky room known as the Club des Hashichins, the club of the hashish eaters. Candles drip wax like slow rain as men in velvet coats pass ornate pipes. Their eyes gleam with inspiration, their laughter slow and golden. Among them sits Charles Baudelaire, poet of dreams and decay. He takes a long inhale and exhales slowly, like a man releasing a secret. Hashish, he murmurs, is a mirror of the soul. It shows us what we might become if freed from law. Mainstream historical fact. The Club des Hashichins was a real gathering of 19th century French intellectuals, including Baudelaire, Dumas, and Hugo, who experimented with hashish as a means of artistic exploration. You inhale the room's perfume, a mix of sandalwood, ink, and resin. Ideas swirl like smoke. You can almost hear them, 1,000 minds stretching the limits of imagination. Then the camera pans. You stand in India, under a mango tree, where a sadhu sits cross-legged, eyes half closed, puffing a clay chillum. His breath hums with mantras older than the pyramids. A faint smile touches his lips. He's not chasing escape. He's honoring connection, the sacred balance between body, earth, and cosmos. His fingers trace ash across his forehead. You realize the Victorian fascination is just another turn in the same spiral. East or west, high or low, humanity keeps reaching for that invisible thread between pain and peace. Quirky tidbit: Queen Victoria's personal physician, Sir J.R. Reynolds, prescribed cannabis tincture to ease her menstrual cramps. So while the Empire outlawed it in colonies, its queen found comfort in its calm. You chuckle softly. Even power bows to pain relief. As you drift through the century, factories rise like iron forests. The industrial heartbeat of progress thunders. Hemp, once vital for ropes and paper, begins to lose ground. Cotton and steam take its place. Still, in medicine, it lingers, a quiet friend in amber glass bottles. You pass through pharmacies from Boston to Bombay, watching chemists measure tinctures with care. But whispers start to grow louder. Doctors debate. Churches frown. Newspapers print uneasy headlines. Oriental narcotics, they call them, lumping cannabis with opium and other imports of mystery. Historians still argue whether this shift was fear, ignorance, or economic greed. Some say moral panic. Others, a colonial anxiety over losing control of what once seemed exotic. You find yourself in an American parlor now, circa 1890, where the family Bible rests beside a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. A mother rocks her child, reading the label that promises calmness and sweet sleep. Few know it contains morphine and cannabis extract. The line between medicine and vice begins to blur. A poet sits nearby, scribbling by lamplight. The mind is a lantern, he writes. But what if the oil burns too bright? You smile at the thought. Every generation finds its flame, and forgets that too much light can blind. The Industrial Revolution quickens its pace. Telegraphs, railroads, photography, all speed up human life. Rest becomes rare, and anything that softens reality gains both allure and suspicion. In smoky cafes, men debate Darwin and God while sipping absinthe. In hidden corners, others roll hash into cigarettes, chasing creativity and comfort. You can feel the tension: reason versus reverie, progress versus pause. Mainstream historical fact: by the late 1800s, hashish had entered European literature, medicine, and recreation. Yet laws began tightening under growing fears of moral decay. A police officer in Cairo, 1898, confiscates a satchel of hashish and mutters, "The West brings wine, the East brings smoke." Both claim paradise. The first modern anti-cannabis laws appear, quietly, bureaucratically, under the guise of public order. In Egypt, India, and South Africa, colonial administrators begin to restrict native cannabis use, calling it degenerate. Quirky tidbit: early British colonial reports on India's cannabis users describe them as lazy, cheerful, and harmless. Yet the same reports recommended bans to preserve moral health. Bureaucratic contradiction at its finest. You stroll through these fading centuries, watching the plant retreat from temples and tinctures alike. It hides in shadows, waiting for its next chapter. But not everyone forgets. In the high Himalayas, monks still prepare bhang for festival days. In Morocco, artisans press keef into bricks of golden hashish, their hands gleaming with resin. In Mexico, musicians sing ballads to marijuana, their laughter rolling through the night air. The world is changing fast, but the ember glows quietly beneath it all. One night, back in London, a wary journalist lights a pipe in defiance of polite society. They say it dulls ambition. He whispers to his cat. Perhaps ambition needs dulling. The cat yawns. The candle flickers. You lean back in your chair, feeling time fold again. The laughter of Paris poets fades, the rustle of hemp paper dissolves, the empire's hum recedes into silence. Something is coming, a storm of laws, lies and fear. The 20th century will not be kind. You exhale, and the room darkens to grey. The air feels heavy, uncertain, like the breath before thunder. The story, for now, pauses on the edge of dawn. The dawn you awaken to is not golden. It's grey, buzzing, and suspicious. It's the early 1900s, and the world has traded curiosity for control. You stand on a street corner in New Orleans, where the smell of jars, tobacco, and fried dough fills the humid night. A trumpet wails from a bar, laughter spills into the alley, and someone is passing a hand, rolled cigarette from palm to palm. They call it marijuana. The word rolls off tongues like a secret. You take a slow breath as the smoke curls upward, mingling with the brass notes and distant laughter. But the easy rhythm of the moment hides something darker. Rumors are spreading, and soon, the smoke will turn into a storm. Mainstream historical fact. The early 20th century marked the first organized campaigns against cannabis in the United States, often rooted in racism and fear. The term, marijuana, was popularized to associate the plant with Mexican immigrants and demonize its use. You watch a police officer stroll by, his hat low, his gaze sharp. A newspaper headline nearby blares, MQWSNOSAMTY. Lieds Tio Crum. The letters are bold, confident, absurd. Inside the newsroom, editors grin over coffee, knowing sensationalism sells better than truth. And so begins the age of the demon weed. You drift through the corridors of power, where men in suits whisper about morality and order. In one smoke-filled office sits Harry Anslinger, America's first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. His voice is gravelly, his tone absolute. This plant, he declares, makes men of color forget their place. The words hang heavy. You can almost feel history tighten its fist. Historians still argue whether Anslinger truly believed his own crusade or simply used fear as a tool. What's clear is this: a campaign began, not against the plant, but against the people who used it. Quirky tidbit: in 1937, during congressional hearings on the Marijuana Tax Act, a representative asked a medical expert if marijuana was dangerous. The doctor replied, "I've never heard of it." The entire law was passed largely out of ignorance and panic. You stand in that very hearing room, watching lawmakers scribble signatures on parchment. The ink dries, and overnight, centuries of human tradition vanish behind bureaucracy. Cannabis is criminalized, not because of science, but because of stories. Outside, jazz still plays, but the rhythm feels heavier now, defiant. Musicians tuck their stash deeper in their pockets, whispering about raids and betrayal. In Harlem, poets still smoke and write. In the Southwest, workers still roll a joint after long days in the fields. But now, every puff carries risk. You move forward through the 1940s, when propaganda reels flicker across movie screens. Reefer madness, they call it. A black and white parade of panic. Actors with wide eyes and trembling hands dance in manic fear as orchestras screech behind them. You almost laugh, but it's too tragic to be funny. Mainstream historical fact: Reefer Madness, 1936, became one of the most infamous propaganda films in history, exaggerating cannabis use as a cause of murder, insanity, and moral collapse. The audience gasps. You hear a mother whisper to her son, "Promise me you'll never touch that stuff." And just like that, the myth becomes the truth. Because it's easier to fear a story than to question it. You drift through World War II, where hemp briefly makes a comeback. Government posters shout, "Hemp for victory," as farmers are urged to grow it for rope, uniforms, and canvas. Even the US Navy depends on it. You stand in a dusty field in Kentucky as soldiers harvest tall green stalks under a sunburnt sky. They laugh, unaware that the very government encouraging this crop will soon ban it again. Quirky tidbit after the war. The Hemp for Victory campaign films were hidden and denied by the US government for decades, until rediscovered in the 1980s. Peace returns, but suspicion remains. The 1950s bring conformity, white picket fences, and television dinners. Cannabis becomes the silent rebel. A ghost haunting jazz clubs, poetry readings, and back alley laughter. You find yourself in a smoky Greenwick Village cafe, where beat poets trade words like currency. One snaps his fingers after a verse. Weed ain't the crime, it's the cure for numb hearts. The crowd murmurs agreement. You feel a spark of rebellion, small but growing. Mainstream historical fact. By the 1950s, cannabis had become a symbol of countercultural identity, especially among artists, musicians, and intellectuals. Yet possession could lead to years in prison. The world outside that cafe, though, grows colder. In suburban homes, television anchors warn of gateway drugs. School children recite slogans. Just say no. Hasn't been coined yet, but the spirit is already there. In the desert, test rockets rise into the air. In Washington, paranoia rises higher. The Cold War begins. And everything, every pleasure, every deviation, is suspect. Cannabis becomes another threat to the American way. Historians still argue whether these fears were truly moral or simply convenient, an excuse to control populations deemed other. You wander through smoky interrogation rooms, where musicians and migrants sit under bright lights. A detective slaps a file on the table. Marijuana possession, he says flatly, as though it's a sin against the state. Some are fined, others jailed, others ruined entirely. Yet the plant remains indifferent, still growing wild along riverbanks, still blooming in hidden gardens, still whispering its calm through the chaos. And so, as the 1950s fade into neon and noise, you find yourself standing at the crossroads of two futures, one ruled by fear, the other by curiosity. The ember hasn't died. It's just hiding, waiting for the right breath to reignite it. Then, from the distance, you hear it. Faint at first, then louder. Guitar strings, the heartbeat of drums, the unmistakable voice of rebellion. The 1960s are calling, and the smoke is about to rise again. You glance once more at the reefer madness, poster peeling on a brick wall. A rat scurries past. Somewhere, a saxophone cries. The city exhales. You smile softly. They can outlaw the leaf, but they can't outlaw curiosity. The world has shifted again. You open your eyes to a ripple of guitar feedback. A crowd chanting beneath the summer sun, and the hazy perfume of rebellion drifting through the air. It's 1967, and you're standing in San Francisco's hate. Ashbury, surrounded by a sea of dye, patchouli, and unfiltered hope. The summer of love hums in your chest like the slow pulse of a bass drum. Everywhere you look, someone's passing a joint. Carefully, reverently, as though it's more than smoke, it's communion. You inhale and feel the air shimmer. For the first time in centuries, people are choosing cannabis again, not as medicine, not as crime, but as connection. Mainstream historical fact, during the 1960s, cannabis became a cornerstone of counterculture in the United States and Europe, embraced by artists, musicians, and protest movements as a symbol of freedom and anti-establishment resistance. A girl with a flower crown leans close and whispers, "It's not about getting high, man. It's about waking up." Then she laughs and vanishes into the crowd. You drift through the throng. Guitars ring out from open windows. Posters of Hendrix and Joplin flap in the breeze. On street corners, poets scrawl verses on brown paper. The air itself seems to hum with possibility. But under that optimism, tension simmers. Across the Pacific, Vietnam burns. Young men light joints to quiet the tremor of fear before being shipped overseas. Music becomes protest. Weed becomes rebellion. In smoky apartments from San Francisco to Saigon, people pass the joint clockwise, each exhale an unspoken question: why are we fighting? Quirky tidbit: US. Soldiers in Vietnam nicknamed cannabis, Buddha grass. It was often traded or grown in camp gardens and used to calm nerves between firefights, an open secret the military pretended not to see. You walk through those camps one humid night. Crickets sing, distant artillery thunders, and somewhere between the two, a small circle of men share quiet laughter. One says, "For a minute, it doesn't smell like death." The others nod. Historians still argue whether the war drove the drug culture or the drug culture fueled the anti-war movement. Either way, the two are tangled like vines. Back home, the counterculture grows louder. From New York lofts to London basements, youth declare they'll make love, not war. Governments panic. Newspapers call them dope fiends. Hippies, dropouts, parents whisper, politicians thunder. Then comes Woodstock, 1969. You stand on a muddy hill, surrounded by 500,000 dreamers swaying in the rain. The air tastes of mud, rain, and resin. Voices rise together: freedom, peace, love. A boy next to you grins, holding a joint the size of a candle. "You think they'll ever legalize it?" he asks. You smirk. "Maybe someday." He exhales, watching the smoke vanish into the clouds. "Then maybe someday we'll learn not to hate." The music swells. Jimi Hendrix bends the star, spangled banner until it weeps. Somewhere, a generation feels the world crack open. But no revolution goes unpunished. By the 1970s, the backlash arrives. Suits return to power, tie-dye gives way to ironed collars, and the establishment sharpens its teeth again. Mainstream historical fact. In 1971, US President Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs, calling drug abuse public enemy number one. Cannabis, despite its mildness, was placed in Schedule I, alongside heroin and LSD, defined as having no medical value. You're in the Oval Office now. Nixon leans over his desk, voice cold and clipped. "We can't have these kids and minorities controlling the narrative." His aide nods. The war begins not in the streets, but in words. Historians still argue whether Nixon's declaration was truly about drugs or about silencing political opposition. Leaked memos decades later reveal what many already suspected. It was about control, not compassion. The hippie dream fractures. In the cities, police raids return. In the suburbs, fear returns. Yet the music doesn't stop. You wander through smoky basements in Brooklyn, dusty dorm rooms in Berkeley, record stores in London. Everywhere, people still roll, still light, still laugh. They whisper jokes about the government's war on plants. A quirky tidbit. In the early 1970s, Cheech and Chong's comedy albums turned stoner humor into mainstream satire, mocking paranoia and proving that laughter was the best resistance. The decade shifts again. Disco lights spin, bell bottoms flash, but behind the glitter, cannabis culture mutates, less utopian, more pragmatic. The plant is no longer a banner for peace. It's survival, identity, ritual. You find yourself in a low-lit dormitory. Posters of Bowie and Marley cover the walls. Someone sparks a joint and passes it with reverence. "One love." A voice murmurs, quoting Marley himself, mainstream historical fact. Jamaican musician Bob Marley and the Rastafarian movement turned cannabis into a symbol of spiritual unity and resistance against oppression. Rastafarians considered it a sacred herb, the healing of the nations. You close your eyes. The rhythm of reggae replaces the heartbeat of protest. Marley sings, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery." The words linger like incense. You realize cannabis has changed masks again, from medicine to rebellion, now to reflection. But outside that serenity, fear escalates. In the 1980s, the war on drugs grows teeth. Helicopters buzz over California valleys. Families in low-income neighborhoods watch their sons arrested for possession, while executives snort lines behind tinted glass. Mainstream historical fact. In the Reagan era, mandatory minimum sentences for drug possession skyrocketed, disproportionately targeting Black and Latino communities. Cannabis arrests quadrupled between 1980 and 1990. You walk through those neighborhoods, sirens echoing, lights flashing, mothers cry from doorsteps, kids scatter. The plant has become a pretext, a weaponized shadow. Still, in college dorms and mountain farms, growers refuse to stop. They hide seeds under floorboards, move crops under moonlight, invent new strains named like secret poems, Northern Lights, Purple Haze, Panama Red. Quirky tidbit: during the 1980s, California's Emerald Triangle became the world's largest producer of illegal cannabis, with entire towns running on hidden grow operations powered by generators and silence. You trek those forests at night, the plants tall, thick, fragrant with survival. We're farmers, one grower tells you, eyes glinting. Not criminals. Just keeping the old ways alive. A single joint glows between you, a soft lantern against the dark. You inhale and think of the tribes, the monks, the poets, all the souls who've shared this smoke across millennia. Despite every wall, every law, every fear, humanity keeps circling back to the same ember. And though the headlines scream DRUGY, you can feel the truth beneath the noise. People are quietly rediscovering what was lost. By the time Bob Marley's voice fades from radios in 1981, the seed is already sown. The movement will sprout again, this time through science, through compassion, through the cracks in policy. You take one last look at the decade's haze, half disco light, half tear gas. Somewhere, a young scientist peers into a microscope, staring at the first isolated cannabinoid molecule. Somewhere else, a patient takes a puff and whispers, "It helps." You know the pendulum is about to swing again. The world will learn, unlearn, and remember. The smoke clears, but the ember glows steady. It's the dawn of a new millennium. A quiet shift after decades of noise, fear, and protest. The world is stepping out of the shadow of the war on drugs and blinking into the bright, uncertain light of rediscovery. You find yourself in a sterile laboratory, the air humming with the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Glass flasks glimmer. Charts line the walls. Scientists in white coats peer into microscopes, eyes alight with curiosity rather than judgment. For the first time in generations, cannabis is being studied, not hunted. Mainstream historical fact: in the 1990s, researchers identified the endocannabinoid system, a complex network of receptors in the human brain and body that interacts directly with compounds found in cannabis, such as THC and CBD. This discovery revolutionized medical understanding and legitimized cannabis research worldwide. You watch as one scientist adjusts a slide under a microscope. "It's like the body was built to work with it," she murmurs. "We've had this system inside us all along." She's right. Humanity and cannabis have always been intertwined. What was once dismissed as dope now reveals itself as medicine. In hospitals from Tel Aviv to San Francisco, doctors cautiously begin prescribing medical marijuana for chronic pain, epilepsy, PTSD, and cancer. The old taboos start to crack. Quirky tidbit: in 1996, California became the first U.S. state to legalize medical marijuana through Proposition 215. It was a political earthquake that sent shockwaves through Washington and inspired similar legislation across the globe. You step outside, into the warm Californian sun. Billboards still warn of drug danger, but in dispensaries tucked between yoga studios and juice bars, quiet revolutions bloom in glass jars labeled Sour Diesel, Blue Dream, and OG Kush. Patients walk in with wheelchairs, canes, and trembling hands, and walk out with hope in brown paper bags. Yet beyond the labs and clinics, another war still simmers. Police raids continue. Sentences remain harsh. A plant that heals is still in many places criminal. Mainstream historical fact: as of the early 2000s, hundreds of thousands of Americans were still being arrested annually for simple cannabis possession. Disproportionately people of color. Meanwhile, states began to rebel against federal prohibition, setting up a slow motion clash between local and national law. In the middle of this tension, The internet rises. Forums, blogs, and early YouTube channels begin spreading knowledge faster than propaganda can suppress it. For the first time, growers in California can share techniques with farmers in Nepal or patients in Poland. You scroll through old message boards. Green text on black screens, where usernames like Weedwizard84 and Herbal Healer trade wisdom, like monks of a new digital monastery. Keep the humidity at 60%. One writes, harvest when the trichomes turn milky. Another replies. And someone posts a simple message that sums it up. The plant wants to live. We just have to stop killing it. A quirky tidbit. The rise of hydroponic growing in the 2000s transformed cannabis cultivation, allowing small-scale indoor farms to thrive under artificial light. A technological echo of ancient gardeners who once worshipped the sun. You move through the decade as legalization movements gather steam. In Canada, activists hold smoke-ins on Parliament Hill. In Spain, cannabis clubs form under cooperative laws. In the Netherlands, coffee shops flourish, blending legality and defiance like a perfectly rolled joint. Mainstream historical fact. By the early 2010s, countries such as Uruguay and states like Colorado and Washington in the US had legalized recreational cannabis, marking a historic turning point after nearly a century of prohibition. You find yourself standing in a dispensary in Denver, 2014. The air smells of citrus and pine. Behind a sleek counter, glass jars gleam under soft LED light. A smiling bartender greets you. Welcome! First time? You nod. It feels surreal. This simple transaction that once meant handcuffs. You hand over your ID, receive a receipt, and realize history just flipped. Everywhere, headlines scream.
The green rush begins! From illegal to industry!
Marijuana's America's new gold mine. Billions flow in. Farmers become entrepreneurs. Dispensaries turn into wellness boutiques. Cannabis is suddenly not just a subculture, it's a market. But the transformation isn't purely clean. You see corporate logos sprouting where activism once grew. The same governments that once jailed people for possession now tax the product they demonized. A woman at a protest holds a sign reading, Legalize io buido gestis is style gestis. Her words hang heavy. Because even as legalization spreads, those imprisoned decades earlier remain behind bars, their lives broken by laws that no longer apply. Mainstream historical fact in 2020. Movements, such as the Last Prisoner Project, emerged to address the hypocrisy of cannabis legalization without retroactive justice, advocating for the release and expungement of non-violent cannabis offenders. You travel next to Canada, 2018, the first G7 nation to fully legalize cannabis nationwide. Crowds cheer, joints spark at midnight, and the smell of smoke mingles with maple air. On TV, politicians declare victory. But in quiet corners, old activists raise glasses not in triumph, but in relief. Took us 50 years to undo 10. One says, shaking his head, quirky tidbit, on Canada's legalization day. Sales were so overwhelming that online government portals crashed within hours. A digital version of Woodstock's muddy chaos. Now the world follows. Thailand legalizes medical cannabis. Germany moves toward full regulation. Even ancient nations like India, once punished for bang, begin to whisper of reform. Meanwhile, scientists push deeper into the plant's mysteries, isolating CBD, CBG, THCA, and dozens of other compounds that each play a role in healing and balance. The cannabis flower becomes a symbol of holistic intelligence, not vice. In hospitals, patients sip CBD tea beside their prescriptions. In universities, researchers publish papers with titles like Endocannabinoids and Neuroplasticity. In kitchens, chefs drizzle infused oils over salads as casually as olive oil. The stigma is fading, but the memory remains. You can still feel the ghosts of monks, shamans, soldiers, and hippies in every puff. Mainstream historical fact. By the 2020s, global cannabis consumption reached hundreds of millions of users. with legal markets exceeding 100 billion in value. Yet the plant's cultural meaning remains deeply spiritual and personal. You stand now at the edge of a field in California's Emerald Triangle once more. But this time, it's legal. Farmers walk openly between rows of glistening green, sunlit buds swaying in the wind. One of them smiles at you and says, "We're not hiding anymore." The words carry centuries of weight. You take a deep breath. The scent is earthy, alive, eternal. And as the sun dips low, you realize the story of cannabis was never just about smoke or law. It's about humanity remembering its oldest companion. You exhale, watching the wind carry your breath across time, toward whatever comes next. The sun you wake under feels lighter, not just in the sky, but in spirit. The smoke that once symbolized rebellion now drifts lazily above picnics, art fairs, and medical clinics. Yet beneath that gentle calm, a new chapter is being written. One that's not just about legalization, but transformation. You're standing in a modern greenhouse in 2025, surrounded by 1,000 shades of green. The air smells sweet, clean, alive. Rows of cannabis plants sway like dancers under UV lights. Automated misting systems hiss softly. Tiny drones hum as they measure humidity and nutrient levels. "Welcome to the future," a young grower says, her lab coat unbuttoned over a tie-dye shirt. "We're not just growing weed anymore. We're engineering peace of mind." Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-2020s, cannabis cultivation became a high-tech industry, incorporating AI, robotics, and precision agriculture. Scientists bred new strains to control cannabinoid ratios and enhance therapeutic benefits. You lean closer to a shimmering leaf. The veins glow faintly under the lights. In one corner, a biochemist studies a digital tablet showing molecular diagrams of THCV and CBN, compounds that might help with diabetes, insomnia, or anxiety. Historians still argue whether humanity's return to cannabis was driven by compassion or commerce. Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the irony. The plant once outlawed for its chaos has become the calm amid modern chaos. You leave the greenhouse and step into the wider world, where cannabis culture has shed its stereotypes. Dispensaries now resemble wellness spas more than head shops. You're greeted by quiet music, minimalist decor, and glass jars labeled like artisanal tea, harmony blend, focus rest. A digital kiosk offers recommendations. Are you here to sleep, to heal, or to tap create? The screen flashes with suggestions. Try micro, dose tinctures with a touch of limonene. Uplifting, euphoric, but clear. A decade ago, that word, euphoric, was taboo. Now it's printed proudly on packaging. The plant has come home, not as an outlaw, but as an ally. Quirky tidbit: in 2023, the first cannabis sommeliers, trained to identify flavor, aroma, and terpene profiles, began earning certifications in countries like Canada, the US, and Germany. Cannabis tasting events soon rivaled wine pairings. You stroll through a festival in Amsterdam, a green earth gathering. Musicians play mellow jazz, scientists host open Q&A booths, and families sit on picnic blankets sipping CBD lemonade. The same streets that once hid rebellion now celebrate renewal. A child tugs her father's sleeve and asks, "Why was it ever illegal?" The father hesitates. Because some people were afraid of what they didn't understand. You smile softly. The truth doesn't need to be complicated. Mainstream historical fact. By 2025, over 70 countries had legalized or decriminalized cannabis in some form, reflecting a global shift in public perception and medical understanding. But it's not all serenity and sunlight. In another corner of the world, corporations compete for patents. Synthetic cannabinoids, lab-grown resin, even genetic sequences of landrace strains, once protected by indigenous farmers. Historians still argue whether this new, green capitalism honors or exploits cannabis heritage. You imagine ancient shamans frowning from the clouds, their sacred herb now boxed, barcoded, and trademarked. In one village in India, though, tradition still beats softly. You walk through a festival where bhang is still poured into silver cups as part of Holi. Drums echo, colors fly, and laughter ripples through the air. No one's arguing legality here, just celebrating connection. You take a sip, feeling the old warmth spread through your body. This isn't commerce, it's communion. Quirky tidbit in Varanasi, India's holiest city. Government licensed bhang shops have operated continuously since the 1960s, even during global prohibition. Locals joke that the gods were never on the DA's payroll. As the night falls, you return to the digital glow of modern life. On your feed, headlines flash. Cannabis reclassified as medicine by yuan. Global market exceeds 120 billion. First church of cannabis gains legal recognition in Indiana. You chuckle softly. Humanity, it seems, has always needed rituals, whether in temples or dispensaries. Mainstream historical fact in 2020, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs officially reclassified cannabis, removing it from the list of most dangerous substances. A symbolic yet significant reversal of 60 years of policy. You scroll further. Influencers share videos of luxury, weed resorts in Jamaica, while elders from Rastafarian communities remind the world that ganja was never fashion, it was faith. The old and new coexist now, woven together like smoke and wind. You wander next to Japan, where strict laws still linger, but whispers of reform grow louder. A monk in Kyoto tells you softly, even silence changes with time. He smiles, his eyes knowing. Weed. Ah. Perhaps one day the West's noise will teach us quiet acceptance. Historians still argue whether total legalization is inevitable, or whether humanity will always keep one foot on the brake, fearful of too much freedom. You close your eyes and picture a map of the world. Green lights glow where cannabis is free, grey where it's still forbidden. But every year, the green spreads a little further, like moss reclaiming stone. In Los Angeles, artists paint murals of goddesses crowned with hemp leaves. In Morocco, farmers who once risked prison now form cooperatives, exporting legal resin. In Mexico, the same land once demonized as the source of marijuana madness celebrates cannabis as cultural heritage. You think of all the hands, the ancient farmers, the jazz musicians, the soldiers, the poets, who carried this plant through centuries of stigma and smoke. And you realize they weren't just keeping a high alive. They were keeping freedom alive. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists recently found traces of cannabis resin on ritual altars in ancient Israel, suggesting the plant was used in early temple ceremonies, possibly as incense to induce divine states. Maybe that's the hidden truth. Humans have always reached for connection, for calm, for something sacred to breathe in when the world feels too sharp. You take one slow inhale, eyes half closed. The scent is both ancient and new. You can almost hear every voice through time, whispering the same word, peace. A mainstream historical fact. By 2025, over 500 million people worldwide consume cannabis in some form, not as outlaws, but as participants in one of humanity's oldest relationships. You open your eyes. The stars shimmer like resin in the night sky. Each one feels like a glowing seed of memory, planted long ago, now blooming freely again. The story isn't finished yet. But the fear is fading, and the smoke at last drifts upward, not as defiance, but as understanding. Tomorrow will come, and somewhere, another person will take their first calm, cautious puff, unaware that they're continuing a 12,000-year-old ritual, and the world once again will breathe. You open your eyes one last time, and the world feels slower, not because it's stopped moving, but because humanity, for once, seems to be breathing in rhythm with itself. The noise, the stigma, the war, and the whispers have finally settled into something gentler, a hum, a heartbeat, a quiet agreement between the plant and the people who never stopped believing in it. You're standing now in a sprawling valley at dusk. Maybe in California's Emerald Triangle, maybe in the Himalayan foothills. It doesn't really matter. The air smells of earth and pine, and from a nearby farm, a faint melody drifts on the wind. An old folk song reimagined by a new generation. You watch as harvesters move carefully between rows of glistening plants, trimming buds, laughing softly. They talk about terpenes, yields, and sustainability. But between their words, you sense something sacred. Something the spreadsheets can't measure. Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-2020s, global cannabis markets exceeded 150 billion, yet many farmers began turning back toward organic and regenerative growing methods, recognizing that true sustainability mirrors the plant's ancient relationship with the soil. One grower kneels, pressing his hand to the dirt. "She doesn't belong to us," he says quietly. "We belong to her." That idea has come full circle now, from shamans and monks, through soldiers and scientists, to these modern cultivators who speak with reverence rather than ownership. Quirky tidbit. Some farmers have started holding harvest ceremonies, inviting communities to share music, food, and gratitude before trimming begins, reviving an ancient pattern of ritual lost since Mesopotamia's hemp fields. The sun dips lower. Golden light catches the resin crystals like stars in a green sky. You walk through the rows, brushing your fingertips across the sticky flowers. You feel centuries under your skin. Babylonian fibers, Chinese medicine, Egyptian rituals, Persian poetry, jazz smoke, hippie rebellion, courtroom protests, and quiet hospital rooms where relief finally arrived. Historians still argue whether cannabis changed humanity or humanity changed cannabis. You smile? Maybe it was always a partnership. Maybe that's the lesson buried under the ash of history: coexistence, not conquest. You pause beside a small wooden table. On it sits a jar labeled Legacy 2025. Inside, perfectly cured buds shimmer faintly. A holographic tag hovers above it, listing cannabinoids, terpenes, and the carbon offset of its cultivation. It's the future in a jar, regulated, traceable, but still strangely romantic. A soft breeze moves through the valley. Someone nearby strikes a guitar chord. Another lights a small joint and passes it silently around the circle. No rebellion, no shame, just connection. You take a gentle inhale, not to escape, but to remember. The smoke tastes faintly of citrus and nostalgia, and as it curls upward, you see faces within it. The Sufi mystics, the Egyptian embalmers, the beat poets, the hippie protesters, the scientists with microscopes, the patients in wheelchairs. They all blur together into one universal sigh of relief. Mainstream historical fact. Recent studies show that cannabis use, when responsibly managed, correlates with decreased opioid dependence and improved mental health outcomes, validating what generations intuited long before laboratories confirmed it. You exhale slowly. The night deepens. Stars emerge like seeds scattered across the dark. Somewhere in that cosmic garden, you imagine another civilization discovering its own green companion, learning, fumbling, and healing, just as we did. Because that's what humans do. We seek plants that remind us how to be human again. You take one last step through the fields. The air hums with crickets. The distant laughter fades into the rustle of leaves. And for the first time in millennia, there's no chase, no criminal, no crusade, just the soft rhythm of life and breath. Maybe the story of cannabis isn't about drugs or laws at all. Maybe it's about remembering how to live gently on the earth, how to listen, how to heal. The wind rises, carrying the scent of resin and rain. You smile, close your eyes, and let it wash over you. Now the night has quieted, and your mind feels as slow and steady as the turning earth beneath you. Every breath you take lingers a little longer, each exhale a little softer. You can almost hear the ancient fields whispering, not in words, but in rhythm. like waves against a distant shore. The story you've just walked through wasn't only about a plant. It was about time itself. About how humanity forgets and remembers, forbids and forgives, wounds and heals. From the fires of old rituals to the laboratories of modern medicine, one thread never broke: the need to find calm amid the noise. So as you settle deeper into the quiet, picture that single green leaf glimmering against the dark, not as smoke, not as scandal, but as serenity. Imagine it swaying gently, unbothered by centuries of misunderstanding. The same sun that warmed the first hemp fields still shines somewhere beyond your window. The same wind that carried ancient incense still moves through the trees outside. Let it all fade together. The history, the voices, the laughter, the light. Let it fade until all that remains is the slow rhythm of your breathing and the faint, comforting thought that peace, like this plant, was never really gone. It was simply waiting for you to remember. Sweet dreams.